Morning everyone, I'm out in our newest garden area. As you can probably tell quite quickly, it has not been kept up with, and the weeding really hasn't happened this year. I've done some amount of weeding where you can tell that at least that there are 2 rows here. Other crops such as these green beans are running up those old pear stakes, so those are escaping the weeds essentially, and it makes it a little bit easier to get around each one. But essentially all of these green beans were planted at the beginning of the season, and they could have done a lot better if we'd kept up with weeding. But we've got 2 kids, one who's not quite a year and one who's over 3 years old, so as you can imagine, time for weeding is not exactly something we have, nor do we really like to do it. So between having a good reason not to and not having really the desire, it kind of works itself out that you don't really end up with much weeding done. But essentially, I've been trying different ways to prevent weeds, and want to see how one of those is working today. So as I said, these are all green beans, but we've also got pinto beans that you probably can't see, and then some black beans as well. We found that we had plants that were drying out as well as the beans drying out, and we were able to at least harvest back out about what we'd used in order to plant these rows, so we'll at least be all right for trying again next year. We weeded as we collected those, so at least to some extent, so you can kind of see that there is a row here. But overall, wasn't terribly impressed with our own job at weeding, but was impressed. The plants mostly seemed to make it, at least in that row. But I want to take you over to our raised beds, and we'll see how we've decided to plant the last set. Typically you are directed to use a certain spacing between plants within a row, and then to space out your actual rows. And so what we actually ended up doing is just using that planting between the plant spacing, and we did that for the row spacing as well. So as you can tell, we have lots of kids, or young kids, so we don't really get in here to weed, but these are all raised beds with paths between. And here I've got 2 beds. They were garlic beds before we harvested that, I believe in July. Remembering exact times is also difficult. But from what I remember figuring out, we had just enough time to go ahead and plant these and hopefully have enough time for the plants to mature and the beans to at least start drying out. We might have to pick the plants early and dry out the beans on our own instead of just picking them dry, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But as you can see, we put them in about the 4-inch spacing, and these I got watered this morning. We haven't had much rain for several weeks. Had about a 1/2 inch either last week or the week before, and maybe a 1/16 of an inch this morning on a little storm that rolled through. But overall, we haven't even been watering these, but you really can't quite tell. We've got good color on these beans, for the most part at least. So they've definitely benefited from being in these raised beds that have been filled with compost over the years, even before we moved in. That's how this had been done. And it's great for water retention. But still, every few weeks, if we haven't had rain, I like to get out here and give them some water. We've even got some in the path here. The 3-year-old helped us do some of our planting, so we have some in the path as well as in the raised beds. I'm sure anyone who has kids can relate, but we can walk around it and we'll still probably get a crop, though those do seem a little bit more hurt from the lack of water that we've had lately. But essentially we think we're gonna do all right on these as long as they mature in time. They're developing quite nicely. We're getting good flowers in here already, though we are getting some running. We're seeing that they're going to be running, so we'll see what they do. I mean, they've got some fence on this on the west side that they can run up if they choose to, but other than that they don't. So maybe they'll spread themselves out, but I'm not too worried overall. They'll be good to, we'll just rip the plants out and draw out the beans as needed and clear the bed when we're done. But only it's August 23rd today, so we'll not probably have too much concern on getting the beds pulled out or anything else, and they're not going to really have enough time to spread into other areas too quickly, so shouldn't be an issue. In future years I may try to do like what we did with our asparagus over here. Nice big thick wall of asparagus as we're letting those ferns grow, and you know, a few tomatoes as well. But I've put these posts in the corners and then ran string, as you can sort of see it here, along those to just pack everything in and hold it up so it'll get better sun exposure and hopefully a better crop next year. But also this was planted very thick. It was actually planted by previous owners at least 5 to 7 years ago, and it's gotten well established. We even split some of that over to here, and you can see we've got some, I think we've got 3 plants that made it over here. Late freeze destroyed a few of them that were poking up too early that we had filled this bed with, but we'll probably try and rope those in as well. But these are quite thick in their distribution in here, which I think has helped a lot with preventing weeds, but also the height that they're up to. They're pretty much able to escape most weeds, except for some of these grasses that are working their way up into the top, and some tomatoes that I need to pull out. I'm just a sucker for free food that I didn't even plant, and so I end up with a few plants I should have got rid of, but then by the time I get to it, they've got fruit on them I want to ripe. So I'm sure about everyone's been guilty of that at least once. But I'll try and get an update out later this year toward the end, hopefully around the time of frost, but before frost, and we'll see how many beans we've collected and see how these look. But it'll obviously be at least a month from now before we really have a good indicator of how well this worked. I'm thinking even next year I may do this for all our types of beans and use these beds all for that, even though typically we use them for tomatoes and peppers and salad greens. I think if we were to thicken them up with different types of beans and other crops like that that are typically row crops, we might get a good rotation in here that would assist in swapping out what nutrients are there, and then we can try to see how well and how fertile our peppers and tomatoes can do out in the new garden. The main problem with that new garden is all of the blackberries that like to poke their way up and through. So although I don't prefer tilling, I may do several tillings in order to kind of work those out of the soil. Maybe see if I can find a friend with a nice large tractor to do that as well. But that's all for now, and hopefully I'll have an update for you guys later. All right.